Danny Green got to get it in, finds LeBron with 4, with 3. LeBron all the way. AD to win.
During an unprecedented time when the pause button was simultaneously pressed across all live sports, one miniseries has emerged to fill that void, and I'm not talking about Tiger King.
Oh, here, kitty, kitty.
No, I'm talking about The Last Dance, co-produced by ESPN Films and Netflix. It's touted as the untold story of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls dynasty. The series has been heavily lauded by critics and audiences alike. I too was completely swept up by it. I found it to be a heavy dose of nostalgia when it came to the players and the games, mixed with newfound intrigue of the plentiful drama unfolding off the court. The spotlight is mostly trained on Jordan, but fellow players Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and Steve Kerr get their moments, as does Coach Phil Jackson. It's told with an intricately seesawing timeline that had me marveling at the editing process alone, a workload that becomes all the more impressive when you factor in the amount of footage they were dealing with. Distilled into 10-hour-long chapters, it's nothing less than the best new thing I've seen in 2020 so far. The Last Dance alley-oops viewers with a bevy of talking points, the unique competitive nature that drives Michael Jordan, punctuated by his intense emotional response that comes at the end of episode 7. Whether Bulls general manager Jerry Krause is a mastermind or suffers a Napoleon complex that led to one of the league's greatest teams dissolving prematurely. Of course, it has added a tank's worth of fuel to the ongoing debate over whether Michael Jordan or LeBron James deserve GOAT status.
To give you one last chance to stop being so blasphemous, Scottie Pippen. Michael Jordan or LeBron James, better? Who are you going with?
Well, I'm going to go with Michael Jordan.
Okay.
But statistically, LeBron James is a better basketball player.
But The Last Dance has stirred up another debate, an age-old question over documentary and journalistic ethics, calling the very terminology we might use to describe it into question. Should The Last Dance even be labeled a documentary, or is it merely a Michael Jordan puff piece? A phrase that was being thrown around before any of us even saw the series. Former Utah Jazz All-Star John Stockton stated such as his reason for initially turning down an interview request, and since The Last Dance released, many people have echoed his sentiments.
Propaganda means they painted a picture that was not true. You tell what wasn't true about that picture. You tell me what wasn't true.
Everything in that whole thing was contrived. Propaganda also takes your mind when you're thinking one thing and make it think another. That is what the news does to you on a daily basis, man.
So what's the cutoff between documentary and puff piece, and where does The Last Dance fall? Before we even attempt to answer that, we need to know the origins of this particular project. Coming off the 1997 NBA season, Michael Jordan, widely considered the best player of his generation, if not the greatest to ever play the game of basketball, had just led the Bulls to their 5th championship in 7 years. Sensing the end of a dynasty, producer Andy Thompson convinced then president of NBA Entertainment Adam Silver to shoot what would become known as the Holy Grail of basketball footage. After receiving the blessing of the Bulls' ownership, Coach Phil Jackson, and Jordan himself, the NBA's production arm was granted unprecedented access to the team. We're talking training sessions inside the locker room, aboard their private jet. Basically, everything you could possibly want to document off the court was documented.
It's peaceful here until you guys come up in here.
This is one of my favorite shots from the footage as Jordan emerges from a restricted area to meet with the press, providing a clear perspective of the film crew's incredible vantage point. The season-long shoot resulted in 500 hours of footage on over 3,000 16mm reels, and it was all recorded with the understanding that the footage would only be used with Jordan's permission. And so it sat in the NBA vault, marked with an X so that nobody could use it, and there it remained for 2 decades. Until now. Several filmmakers surfaced over the years hoping to make a standalone documentary of the footage, but it seemed that Jordan was as fiercely protective of his image as he was over the basketball during a game. It wasn't until 2016, after O.J. Made in America and Making a Murderer had released, proving that long-form documentaries were resonating with audiences like never before. Filmmaker Michael Tolan took notice and saw an opportunity to pitch a mini-series idea to Jordan. He was granted a rare meeting with Michael, who read every page of his carefully constructed lookbook, but it wasn't until Jordan noticed one of Toland's credits in particular, that of the 2014 documentary Iverson, that he was swayed. Michael said, "I watched that thing 3 times, made me cry. Love that little guy." Then he walked around the desk, extended his hand, and said, "Let's do it." Toland enlisted 3-time 30 for 30 director Jason Hare to direct the series. While they took full advantage of the 3,000 reels of footage under lock and key in the NBA vaults, in addition to the broadcasts of dozens of games, they also conducted over 100 interviews with almost everyone you'd hope to hear from, and Justin Timberlake for some reason. This included 3 lengthy interviews with the man himself, the likes of which we've never seen before, telling tales out of school, opening up personally, and perhaps auditioning for a future YouTube reaction channel. Do it, MJ. You know you want to.
And then feel
Now, I completely understand the desire, even the necessity, to have Michael Jordan tell his own story in his own words. And in terms of documentary practice, there's nothing remotely wrong with that. It's carried out far and wide, most memorably in my mind by the great Errol Morris, who has been at the forefront of this type of interviewing for decades, giving his subjects all the time they need, sometimes to their own detriment. It's only when the filmmakers have to bend their will to someone else's, especially when that someone else is the primary subject of the film, that this becomes an issue. At that point, it's a matter of permission, a potential conflict of interest, ultimately determined by whomever has editorial control, something that director Jason Hare has actually addressed head on.
And people have said, well, because Jordan's folks and his team had input into it, there was other stuff that could have been delved into more. Did you run into a lot of stop signs, don't go here, in the editorial process?
I ran into 0 stop signs during the editorial process. So when that criticism comes, it comes from 1 or 2 sources, and then I think it becomes kind of in vogue to maybe adopt that and look at the doc through the lens of, well, this is what Michael wanted to say. Michael was involved, but on a distant satellite level in the making of this documentary. He never came close to the edit room. He only was seeing cuts when they were really just about to go on the air, just more out of curiosity than editorial control.
If we're to take Hare at his word, which I'm entirely inclined to do, that doesn't necessarily change the circumstances of the project. One of the more authoritative voices to emerge in the wake of The Last Dance was that of Ken Burns, the historical documentarian behind the series Baseball, the Civil War, and the Vietnam War, to name a few, and the namesake of this very Zoom and Final Cut Pro. In speaking with the Wall Street Journal, Burns made a point that Michael Jordan's production company Jump 23 was involved with the making of the series. While this information isn't very forward-facing, a couple clicks on IMDb do indeed confirm that Jump 23 is attached as an uncredited production company, an arrangement Burns alleges he would never agree to. He expounded, if you are there influencing the very fact of it getting made, it means that certain aspects that you don't necessarily want in aren't going to be in, period. And that's not the way you do good journalism, and it's certainly not the way you do good history. My business. Burns added, I find it the opposite direction of where we need to be going. Here, he seems to be referring to the current documentary landscape, as the form continues to grow in popularity, spurred by both the rise of streaming services and our morbid curiosity with true crime. So has the attention to accountability that documentarians have always faced. Now, this casts a wide net sinking back to the medium's origins, something I'd love to explore in future videos, but we don't need to look that far for other examples. In 2020 alone, we've seen projects about Taylor Swift, Hillary Clinton, and Michelle Obama, made entirely possible by their own involvement, that raise similar red flags. Are these documentaries or just good PR? That same question was on my mind as I watched last year's The Imagineering Story, a docuseries about Disney's research and development division that creates and designs their world-renowned theme parks. While I really enjoyed that series and would full-heartedly recommend it to anyone and everyone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching what could essentially be chalked up to Disney propaganda, that I was paying to watch no less. Sure, Sure, the series was refreshingly open on chapters of the company's past struggles and failures, which is something you need to create a compelling narrative. But it's one thing to be critical about the past, and another to be critical about the present. The Last Dance entirely concerns itself with the past, and that perspective largely works in its favor. All involved are more likely to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. Being over 20 years removed from the events, there's not as much at stake, even if some of the rivalries still feel very much intact.
Straight up bitches.
To its credit, it seems like nearly everything is on the table, something Jason Hare stressed in his response.
We addressed all the stories that I hoped that we would address when we embarked on this 4 years ago. We did the accusations of Michael's gambling. We did the death of his dad. We did the conspiracies that surrounded his dad's death and his leaving for baseball. We did the criticisms that Michael has received of being a really harsh teammate. There's a lot of things we got into here. We got into the Republicans buy sneakers too thing. There's a lot of things that we got into here that I haven't seen him speak on the record about yet, and I'm proud of the stories that we told.
Addressing unflattering aspects of Jordan's personality and controversial moments from his past pushes the project further into documentary territory, but concluding coverage with a positive spin, deflating arguments, and putting any unsavory conspiracies to bed while propagating one of Michael's own.
So it really wasn't a flu game. It was food poisoning.
Pushes it right back in the other direction. Oh, and here's one crucial piece of the puzzle that Hare left out that I think is truly unforgivable. I will not stand for the blatant erasure of Electronic Arts' Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City for the Super Nintendo.
It's showtime.
Ken Burns would not have left that out, just saying. What The Last Dance really boils down to is a matter of access. As was likely the case with the Imagineering story, without the involvement of the subject, we lose a significant amount of material with which to best tell the story. But with that involvement, the story consequently becomes compromised. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. As Will Leach said in his review, The Last Dance is 10 hours of Jordan-endorsed and approved hagiography, but I'm not sure it could have ever been anything else. Without that footage, without the bounty of Michael's interviews, this becomes a completely different project, and while that one might not have its documentary status under review, there's no guarantee anybody would care to watch it. Ultimately, due to the nature of the arrangement, even if it was out of necessity, The Last Dance leans closer to Puff Piece. By wisely fixating and concluding its timeline with Jordan's run for the Bulls, this might assist with revisionist history, as I'm sure most people prefer to remember this moment as the last shot of Michael Jordan's NBA career.
Open! Chicago with the lead! That may have been the last shot Michael Jordan will ever take in the NBA.
Ignoring his second return from retirement to play with the Washington Wizards, the actual final chapter of Jordan's legacy on the hardwood that YouTuber Thrice High has effectively covered in Encore, the story of Michael Jordan's real Last Dance. None of this is meant to rain on The Last Dance's parade or to suggest that I didn't care for the series. Conversely, I absolutely loved it. It's a sprawling narrative that's immaculately told, a decade-spanning saga with origin stories and dozens of micro-narrative threads. As I said at the top, it's the best new thing I've seen in 2020 so far. What's important is that the role of editorial control be part of the conversation. Documentary ethics and practice should always be scrutinized, even if it's about the GOAT.
The Last Dance documentary, its legacy will be, it ended the LeBron versus Michael Jordan debate. It is over. Marcellus, do you agree?
No, I don't agree.
Have you seen The Last Dance? If so, what did you think of the series, and where do you feel it lands in this debate? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you down there. If you liked this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Subscribe to Cineflect for more video essays, ranked lists, and other cinematic experiments. And click that bell next to the subscribe button if you'd like to be notified anytime I upload a new video. For Cineflect, I'm J.S. Lewis. Until next time, watch something good.